everybody, Whitney Labrie here, and today I thought we'd do several different types of fall projects that I've been working on this fall season. The first one is my little gnome stove. So this is a Crisambon stove that is broken. It's missing some pieces. It doesn't have the door, it doesn't have the side panel, and then on top it doesn't have the little pieces that would hold the irons. It does have the base plate, so I'm going to go ahead and glue that down because we're going to make this an outdoor magical gnome stove. I'm going to take my Tester's gold paint and I'm going to start highlighting a lot of the details that are on this stove. Basically, I just popped some paint on there and then rubbed it off. Hey, we don't have to get too crazy detailed. It is going to go outside after all. And then what I'd like to do is have a couple vines going up the side. So I took some brown packing paper and I basically took some glue and twisted it up until it looked like two really nice vines going up the side. I do have another video where I do this, where I go into a lot more detail on that. Now I'd like to add a little bit of moss, or the look of moss, to the stove. And I always use my blended tuft when I do that. So it's like a flocking material. This one I spent $11 on. I bought it at Hobby Lobby. This one container, I have used it since I started the Labyrinth project. This is the only container I've ever purchased of it, if that lets you know anything about how long lasting this product is. I added my ultimate glue to the areas where I would like the moss to lay, and then I'm just sprinkling it on. I like to do this over a sheet of paper or wax paper so I can catch any of the additional that fall off, and then I'll just put that right back in the container and reuse that later. And then with some extra flocking, I'm just adding a little bit to my vines that are going up the side. That'll add for some nice detail. Okay, now these are miniature leaves, and a lot of people ask me where I purchased these. These are just an Amazon product. So what I'm going to do now is add some of these leaves to my stove, but first I'm going to mix them up. So I'm just adding all 4 colors into a little pile and giving them a nice little stir. And then I'm adding my glue to the stove, and then to give it more of a natural look, I am going to literally just sprinkle them on, and wherever they land, just like in nature. And then if I have any weird ones, like I do feel like are slightly out of place or would look better in somewhere else, then I'll add or subtract with my tweezers. Now at this point, it's just really about adding the decoration. So I have a couple raffia pumpkins here that I'm gonna add. So I've got a little teapot and a bronze colored teacup on a saucer. And then this is actually a handmade basket. I don't even recall where I found this anymore, but it had a tag, it said handmade, and I love it. It looks more like a goose basket. Such a pretty piece, honestly, so I thought I'd go ahead and add it to this. I also have a tarnished copper mold right here that I thought would be really pretty also, just kind of hanging out, leaning against the vine. I also have a copper pot that I'm gonna use. I have some miniature dried corn as well that I thought would be really pretty, add some color to the top of the stove area. And then unfortunately, this little kitty has a broken paw. So what I think I'm gonna do, I'm gonna use this, I'm just gonna kind of push it up underneath one of the front legs and kind of hide the fact that it's broken, because it's such a cute piece and I really hate to throw it away, just because it has a little damage to it. So I'm gonna go ahead and put that on the base of the stove. And this little mini muffin pan, this is actually Mini Brands made that, and then this pie, most likely handmade, and I like that it looks delish, so I'm gonna use that. I'm also gonna add an additional pumpkin to the inside of the oven area. I just felt like it looked a little naked over there. And then once everything is in place, I always like to go back and add really more outdoorsy stuff. So I'm gonna add a little bit more moss here and there, fill in some blank spaces. And then once that's done, I'm gonna take some more of my autumn leaves and I'm gonna add those around as well and add them on top of the accessories to, give a layered look, because obviously if the leaves are falling, they're gonna land on some of the things that we have added to the stove. Now, of course, I did call this a gnome stove. This would be one of those magical little stoves that gnomes and fairies and pixies might be cooking their delicious treats on. And I just happen to have these little gnomes. Now, I bought this at a booth at the Dollhouse Convention in San Jose, and I bought it from a company called A&W Creation. I did check their website. I don't see any more of these gnomes there, and I'm not 100% sure if it's just something they sell at their booth, but I would definitely check them out and see if they have more. Because if they do, when I go to the convention coming up in October, I'm definitely gonna try to scoop up a few more of these little cuties. So here it is outside, and here's some close-ups of the stove. I really think the gnomes make this whole thing just pop. I liked it before, but you add the gnomes and it's like next level. All right, for the next fall project, we're gonna make some very simple polymer cakes. When I say simple, I really mean it. I'm not going to be mixing any clay together. I'm just going to be using it straight out of the package. And I think that this is a really good project for those of you really like myself who are somewhat new to polymer clay or brand new. So either one. So what I'm starting off with is just some straight out of the package orange polymer clay. I'm just going to roll these down to the little tiny circles, and these are going to be my pumpkins. I'm going to do a few on the top and a few on the side. For the cake portion itself, I didn't have a true white. I have gone through it. I have this one that had some speckles in it, and I basically just rolled it out and cut it down and smoothed it out with my fingers so it looks like a little cylinder. Then I rolled out more polymer clay in the same color, and I just snaked it out, and then I'm going to just wrap it around the base. And this is a really easy technique to make it look like an icing trim on the bottom of the cake. And once I have the correct size, I just cut it. And then I have this handy dandy tool right here which comes to a point and then has a little ball at the end, and I'm just taking that and going all the way around the cake. I'm making a little impression in that border so that'll give the look of a really nice icing border on the base of your cake. Now I'm going to take my little orange balls and I'm going to squish them just a tad bit so they're not perfectly round, and then I'm taking my other tool here and I'm going to make a little mark in them all the way around so that they look like little pumpkins. And then I did take a little pin and I put a little hole in the top of them because I'm going to add little stems, and you'll see that here in a little bit. Now I'm taking some green, again, straight out of the package. I'm not mixing it with anything, and I'm going to snake that out very thin, and I want to create a vine that goes around the top and then down to the base of the cake. I'm also going to add a little bit of a vine, and then I'll be adding my pumpkins on top and around the vine. All right, and then I rolled out a little brown, the thinnest of brown, you guys. I rolled it to a point, a very thin point, and then just cut that, and then I'm gonna add those in as my little pumpkin stems. And then I did add a little bit more polymer green as leaves. I flattened out some little bit of clay and then added those in as leaves. And that's that cake, and we're gonna let that bake. In the meantime, before we do that, we'll make another cake. And this one's even more simple. I just rolled out, of course, a ball of clay. I squished it down so it wouldn't be so perfectly round, squished it down, and then I added in my pumpkin lines. Then I'm snake out more of that polymer clay again, and I'm gonna wrap that around the top of that pumpkin. And I'm making sure that it's going out to the edge because I want to set another white pumpkin on top of that. And I'm doing the same thing with that white pumpkin. And you can see that toothpick, I'm making a hole at the top because I'm going to be adding a stem. But in the meantime, I'm going to wrap a little bit more vines. So added some polymer clay leaves as well. Now this cake in particular, like I feel like I could leave them like this, and then those could also be, instead of a cake, it could be a pumpkin stack on the front patio. So really this one, you could use it in a couple different ways if you wanted to. All right, and then I'm just gonna bake them. And then I added them to some cake plates, and there you go. 2 simple cakes for the fall or Halloween season. Now, I don't know if you've seen these type of chairs on porches. I used to see them a lot more growing up in Texas, but I haven't really seen them too much out here. But to be honest, I haven't really looked that much. But I always thought they were really pretty. And they're basically old chairs that people turn into garden chairs, right? And that's what we're gonna do with this one. That is missing the seat portion of the chair. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to paint this chair, which is plastic, in a sage green color. I actually think it's called Italian sage. What I've taken right here is some twine and I've unraveled it basically. And this makes for some really great vines. And I do have another video on this as well. And I'm going to wrap them around the chair. And this is going to allow me to put some other fun stuff in that chair without everything falling through. And so I have this small urn, some fake manzanita, and we're gonna sit it right into that chair. And you can see I've added just a little bit of moss. Now I have these little bales of hay, and I mentioned before that my friend Nancy gave them to me, and I always appreciate friends giving me miniatures because eventually I will find a way to use them. And in this case, I've already used one for the bike. Now I'm going to use one here for the chair. And then I just drape those vines right over the hay bale. Now I'm going to just add a little grime to that urn. It just felt a little too new looking. And remember, this is definitely something that's been out on the patio for a while. And so it's just not quite as new as it once was. So I'm just adding a little bit of grime. Now I'm going to take my ultimate glue and I'm going to spread it all around that vine area where the seat is, or was. And I'm adding some more of my tufting. I'm just going to sprinkle it on. Don't need a huge amount, just a little bit. Now, once I've added that, I'm going to go ahead and add some moss. Now, this is like a purple moss. I really don't know what this is called, but it always comes in that variety pack, that variety moss pack that you can get at Michael's, where it has this type of moss in it and then the other like lichen and like the other stuff. So I think you know what I'm talking about when I say that. But I just love the purple color. I love it for the season. So I'm just going to add a little bit to the chair and glue that down. And then I am going to add that other type of moss to the side also. And then the additional thing that I added was these 2 lettuce bunches. And I just love these little bunches because they've got that pink and green and fuchsia color, like that purple. And I just love it. I love it for the season. The next step, of course, is what's going to really make this whole piece come together. And that is these white pumpkins. So these are polymer clay. I made them just like I made the cake pumpkins. And once they are added, boom, it just takes this piece to the next level. And I love it so much. And so you will definitely see this on the front patio of my dollhouse for the fall, for this season, as you can see here. This was one of the easier projects I did for the fall season, but gosh, it may be one of my favorites. Okay, and for the next project, I have this piece of remnant foam board, which I'm going to use for a base. And then I have one of these old big wheel bicycles, also called a penny farthing. Thank you to Charles for mentioning that to me. I appreciate it. I could not remember for the life of me. But anyway, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working on the base of that. I'm going to add some flocking to it, but before I usually do flocking, I like to do a base coat so that way you won't have any of that foam board peeking through. So I'm just taking a very dark hunter green color. I'm going to just paint the whole thing, including the sides, in the green. And honestly, before it's even dry, I'm going to use the paint as glue here, and I'm going to go ahead and take some more of that tuft that you saw earlier and flock this piece of foam board. Now I will wait for that to dry. Once it's dried, I will go ahead and glue down my bike. I do want to have this be like a scene that I could just set down on the front yard of my dollhouse during the fall. And so I'm going to add some of this dried dead vines and leaves, I think is what it's called. I bought this again at Hobby Lobby. It was very inexpensive. It's great for these type of projects. So I'm just going to add that all around the wheels. Those type of things tend to gather. So I'm putting those up in the front and the back wheels. Now I do have another bag here of fall leaves in some golden colors. These were probably left over from a kit that I had, to be honest. So I'm just adding more glue. I'm going to just sprinkle those leaves all around. Now I do tend to keep broken items, and I do that so I can use them in projects just like this. These are perfect for those type of things. So I have this kind of broken crate, and I'm going to glue it near this bicycle base. It has some glue and stuff on the back of it too. It looks like it was probably part of another scene at one time and someone pulled it off. So now this is going to find a home here, and I'm adding a little bit more moss to the interior. Again, I always add a lot of that sort of thing, and then I can always pull back when I need to pull back. Now this sunflower pot right here, it's also broken. You see the back is broke off. So I'm going to go ahead and glue that down near the crate, and that way we can hide the back and also add a little color down there. Now I'm just adding a little bit more moss, and also I want to add a couple pumpkins into that crate. And then on the back, I'm going to add a hay bale to the back. This will also hide some of the damage from the pieces in front. And then I'm going to add a little bit more vines and a little bit more moss. Of course, always add moss when in doubt. And then I'll add a little pumpkin to the top of that hay bale. Now see, there's a little bit of damage on the back of that crate. So again, a little moss is going to help me hide that. Now let's add another pumpkin to the other back wheel. And what I'd like to do is add a more like a leather looking seat to the top of the bike. I actually turned the bike upside down and kind of drew out a little stencil, and then created with my polymer clay the same shape, and then baked it, and then I just glued it to the top of the seat. So it has more of a leather seat look. Now I also have this squirrel. I use the same squirrel in my Willy Wonka diorama. I'm going to put that on the back side on top of that hay bale, kind of leaning up on that pumpkin. All right, and then I'd really like to add some mushrooms. I did not 3D print these myself. I actually purchased these, and I'll put the Etsy store in the description if you're wanting to purchase these as well. And I just painted them, of course, in some fall colors, and I'm going to be adding those to this. I thought I'd put one on top of the crate and then maybe one down below, and I think that these really made this whole piece pop. And then the next thing I'll do is go ahead and sprinkle a few more fall leaves here and there, just adding a little bit more details. Now, this is how I presented this piece on a short. I got some feedback. Someone suggested that I add rust to the wheels and some other areas. 100% agree. Someone said that the squirrel was too shiny and to maybe paint that to kind of give it more of a realistic vibe. Totally agree with that. And then my own critique was that the piece itself was like base heavy, and so I really wanted to add something to the top. So I'm adding a little floral to the top, and this is the outcome of that once I added the additional things. I really did love the way that this came out. All right, next project is the painter set project. So I bought this painter set at Hobby Lobby, and I've purchased one of these in the past and made it my own, made it a little bit more unique for me. And then this time though, I thought I would do more of a fall inspired painter set. I know the fall really does inspire a lot of us. What I started to do here is just, instead of stain it, I'm just painting it brown and then I'm wiping the paint off, and that's gonna give me the same look in some cases as some stains give you. And while it's drying, I'm going to start working on the painter's palette. It already comes with some little perfect circled paint dabs on it, or whatever you want to call it, paint circles. I have all these little pretty fall colors right here, and I'm just going to start swishing some paint onto the board and basically muddying it up quite a bit and making it look much more like a real painter's palette. My father was an artist and he had several of these, and to be honest, over years of using these palettes, they themselves almost become like a really pretty art piece. Anyway, so I'm just taking inspiration from his old palettes. Another thing that I thought would kind of be a fun detail to add was I wanted to make it look like some of the tubes of paint were being squished out onto the palette itself. So I just grabbed a couple fall colors. I've got orange, I've got a cream color here that's kind of hard to see on camera, and then a dark milk chocolate brown. And I kind of molded them into different shapes of paint. So I've got a couple little squiggles of paint, and then I did like a straighter shape coming out of the tube. And because it's clay, of course, I'm gonna just bake that for a very low amount of time. Once they're baked and cooled, I will go ahead and begin to glue down the tubes of paint, and then I will glue down their matching polymer clay in front of the tube, or kind of gently leaning it on the tube so it does look like it's coming straight out of the painter tube. And then what I'll do is I'll go ahead and glue that onto the painter's box. And I want the box to be sitting on an upright position. So I'm going to slightly glue the top part to the painter's palette. Then what I'm going to do is start gluing in the rest of the paint tubes and also the paint brushes that come with this set. They do not look real at all, but what I'm going to do is shove them into the set so it allows the whole look to be more full looking, but I'm just going to put the paintbrush underneath the palette itself so they can't be seen. So maybe they'll look like paint brushes or even pencils or something under there. All right, now of course it's a brand new set and I want it not to look quite so new. I want these to look really used and enjoyed. So I'm taking another metal finished paint and I'm just gonna paint the tubes in more of a brushed metallic versus that bright, almost stainless kind of feel. I just want them to look a little bit more subtle and not so bright and new. All right, now let's do a little painting here. So I've got some extra cardstock here. I'm just gonna cut down a couple little pieces, and these are gonna be my canvases, and I've got a couple different sizes. So I'm gonna glue those to the back, and then a little bit larger one here, I'm going to paint a little fall scene. Now I'm gonna really channel my inner Bob Ross, and I'm just gonna paint some happy fall trees. I started with a base of green and blue, then I did some quick brown streaks, those are gonna be my trunks, and then I just dabbed on some different color of fall trees. Pretty simple, and there you go. You've got your little fall painting. Now, the other two canvases that are sitting in there, I did paint them like a base color. I did one in blue and one in orange. Initially, I was going to leave those white, but then I thought, well, I'm going to put some stuff in front of it, and so that color is going to help the other accessories pop. That's what I was visioning anyway. All right, and then I'd like to have like a little cup with some water in it that we would use to clean the paint brushes. So I'm gonna add some UV resin to a broken cup. This was a wine glass, but the stem broke off, so now I'm just gonna use it as a painter's cup here. And to give it that dirty water look, I am adding just a tad bit of my my resin color here called Coffee, stirring that up, and then I'm going to add that into where the thumb hole is in the palette. And then I thought it'd be fun to add a little bit of nature. So I've got these dried flowers, and I want to glue in a couple of those to the back area, and I'm just going to add those. And in my mind, this is like some pieces of inspiration that maybe this artist is drawing from, maybe the view and some of these really pretty little dried flowers. So I'm going to add those as well. All right, and then I wanted to add a painter's rag. All the paint that I've been using, I've been rubbing it off on my little paper towel right here. And I've been doing it up in the corner so that I could tear this part off and use that as a painter's rag. And it will have all the colors that we've been using today, so it would make sense for the piece. It's just a real napkin. Gonna set it inside and kind of glue it down, smush it in so it looks like it would be in the exact place that you would use to kind of wipe off your paintbrush in between paint colors. The other thing I'd like to add is just a nice warm beverage. And I always think of fall and warm beverages. It just seems to go hand in hand. And lately I've been really into tea more than coffee. Believe it or not, no caffeine tea. And most people who know me just can't even believe that because I am such a caffeine fiend. We're gonna do a little cup here and I'm gonna call it tea, and even though it's probably really coffee. To make it look like tea, I'm going to add a little piece of string, a wired string actually, and then I just cut down a little tiny piece of paper to make it look like the tea paper that hangs off the string. I imagine this might be, of course, a pumpkin spice or a vanilla chai, or maybe a harvest blend from Trader Joe's, which I've lately been very into. And then we'll go ahead and add that to our scene. And then I just added a little fall flower to the side of the cup. In addition, I did have already a paintbrush, a blue paintbrush, and I wanted to add that. It just is much more realistic, and so I'm going to go ahead and add that too. And we are done with our little fall painting scene. And in the close-ups, you can see much better the little paint squiggles coming out of the tubes. One of the other things that I really love for the season is a tablescape. And I love them for all the different holidays, but the fall for some reason is just so lovely. So I didn't really have anything, and I went on Etsy and I went to Dove and Pear, which does some of my favorite 3D prints, and I printed up this tablescape. There's more to it actually. It comes with silverware and it comes with some different floral as well that you can print, but the main thing I really wanted was the bowls. The look that I want to go with is this look right here. I love everything about the color pattern, and so I want to kind of mimic that with this 3D print. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to paint my little miniature pumpkin bowls in this Italian sage, the same Italian sage that I used earlier for the chair. For the plates, I'm just going to paint them in a white, make it nice and clean and simple like we saw in the picture. And then it even came with the printed placemats, and these are like a woven design. So I'm going to go ahead and paint these in a chocolate brown, and then I'm going to highlight them in this camel color. All right, now I do want a table runner, and I've got some white material, just some plain white fabric. So I'm going to cut that linen down, and then I've added just a piece of wax to the top of the table because I sprayed that with some fabric stiffener. I don't want the stiffener to ruin at the top of the table. I don't know if it would, but I just don't want to take any chances. So I'm going to let it dry in place with that piece of wax on the table. And then once my little pumpkin bowls are nice and dry, I'm going to paint the stems in gold. And then I've just used mini hold to put all of this together because moving these tables around, if you've had to do it in the past, you're gonna knock it and they're gonna flop everywhere. So I'm just gonna use mini hold to make sure everything stays put while I start putting the table together. I also want to do a little mini centerpiece. So I'm basically going to mimic in some ways the chair that I've already done. So I have this as a cake plate, and I just added that lettuce leaf to it. I added a little piece of manzanita. I added the moss, and then I added white pumpkins. Now these pumpkins, they were part of the 3D print, so I just added them to my little centerpiece here. Part of the 3D print also was the candle and candlesticks, so I painted the candlesticks gold and left the candles white. And then I originally printed these for the glasses, but then I decided to go with a more opaque look. So I printed these also, and those are the ones I'll use on the table. So I'll go ahead and add my centerpiece. I've got my candles. Now it came with 3D printed silverware, but I did not print them. Mostly that was a laziness on my part because I didn't want to sand them. So I already have a whole bunch of silverware and I just spray painted it gold, and I'm gonna use that. And then after I put everything together, I realized that I really needed napkins. I did cut down some more white fabric, and then I added those underneath the salad plates and between the dinner plates. And there you go, a little tablescape for the fall. And honestly, I really love it. I think though that what I'd like to also have is some water glasses on the table too, so it looks really formal. I think that would really be pretty. I looked all over. I thought I had some. So before I buy more or print some, I think I will have to look a little bit harder to see if I have that. And then I'll go ahead and add that back into the dollhouse. All right, so that's it, you guys. Those are all of my fall projects that I've done this year so far. And of course, fall will kind of be pushed aside here in a couple weeks because it'll be full-blown Halloween. And then I always have my fall stuff up again. I don't know if you guys do that too, where I typically actually don't decorate in September. I decorate for Halloween. I take everything down. I put fall stuff up through November, and then I do Christmas. So let me know if that's kind of how you do it, or do you do fall all September, Halloween, do fall again, or do you go straight to Christmas? I'm always curious about what people do. I like to hear about their different traditions. So anyway, hope you loved all of these different projects. I have made shorts on most of these, if not all of them, and I thought it would be more fun to kind of elaborate on some of these projects so you knew where and how I got different materials, etc. Thank you so much for being here, you guys. If you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and do so you don't miss out on any future content. Of course, I have plenty in store for you for this Halloween season. I'm also working on some different projects over on my Patreon, so please consider becoming a member there. It definitely helps me and definitely supports this channel. I really appreciate it. As always, please leave a comment, give the video a thumbs up. Those are also incredibly supportive of the channel, and I really do appreciate that so much. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been a pleasure hanging out with you this week, and I'll see you next time. Bye.